from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Welcome to episode number 138, where I am joined by extraordinary women team Jill McCauslin and Chris Brown. Jill and Chris both hit their 50s, lost weight, became fit, and discovered that running and lifting weights can be a lot of fun. They got fit in their 50s and plan to stay fit and get strong well into their 60s and beyond. Jill and Chris decided to create an online community called Becoming Elli, dedicated to becoming and staying fit by gaining strength and having fun at the same time. They want to investigate different ideas about fitness, food, and general health. Their friendship became a great way to have a buddy for running and discussing nutrition and comparing gym workouts. One day they were discussing their future plans and discovered they both wanted to start a blog podcast community for women like themselves, and from that conversation, Becoming Elli was born. Becoming Elli is dedicated to women becoming strong and fit in the second half of life. They are becoming because it is a never-ending process of getting and staying fit and strong. You've probably never heard of Elli before, but she is the Norse goddess of aging who surprised everyone when she was challenged to a wrestling match with Thor and won. Jill and Chris named their community Becoming Elli because they know that there is a whole group of women over 50 who are working together to become and stay fit and strong. That's about the extent of their knowledge of Elli, and nobody seems to be making a superhero movie about her. But they are inspired by Elli and think we can become like her, surprisingly strong as we age. It was great fun talking to these two, and they have inspired me to pull my socks up and get moving more. Welcome, Jill and Chris, to the Keto Women podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having us.
Yes, it's great to be here. Thank you.
We're turning the tables. You put me in the hot seat, which, as my listeners will know, makes me very uncomfortable. But now I feel a lot more comfortable turning the tables back on you two.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So why don't you tell me a bit about you? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll start. I am a business owner who found herself learning about the computer in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And I think that having the computer and a job where I sat in front of it all the time helped me to put on some weight. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a whole lot at once. It was definitely over a time period, but I realized when I turned 50, I realized that I really had gained a lot of weight and wanted to lose it. And over a time period was able to do that. So, it's something that I really try to keep a focus on, getting and staying fit.
Sounds good.
It was through my business that I first met Jill.
Yes, we both, so I also have a business and also sit in front of a computer a lot. But Chris and I both had rented office space in the same place, and we do a lot of fitness things, running and whatever. And we would start every day with talking about what our training had been and what we were running and what we were doing, and then began to actually run together. And we signed up for races together and put together a relay team for the Akron Marathon, and we just had a lot of fun doing that. And it was out of all of that we ended up deciding that we really wanted to start a community for women over 50 who were interested in being fit and strong. And so we have our Becoming Elli website and the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
And you say you made changes to lose weight, Chris. I mean, was that the same for you, Jill? Or did you not have weight issues?
So yes, I just like Chris said, I had a very gradual, I always felt like I was overweight, but when I look back at what I weighed when I was 22, I think that was amazing.
It's funny that, isn't it? I do the same.
Yes. So I think, if only I weighed what I did when I was 35. So gradual weight loss over the years, and I was never an athletic person. So I've always, I'm a reader, I'm a writer, very sedentary person by nature, I guess. And at some point in my 40s, I began to think, all right, I've got to do something. And I have to say, I tried a number of different weight loss programs, different things. I can't say I really ever went on to really crazy diets, but very slow weight loss. But I added in the working out at the gym, and which I really like. Once I started doing strength training, I was shocked at how much I liked that. Mm-hmm. And then I added in the cardio, the running and that kind of thing. I went to so this was the first time, I hadn't really even actually heard of keto, but I went to a program at the wellness center at the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And the doctor there, she was the first person I ever talked to who ever said anything about not eating grains. Because I remember her saying, we feed grains to animals to make them fat. Mm-hmm. Try just giving them up for a while and see what happens. And it was shocking. It was really the most successful I had been was when I went through that program. And it was very much, we did not call it keto. I would guess if anyone had said anything, it was probably a low carb program, but it was very health based. It was, she was big on doing a lot of blood work. It was a doctor and a therapist combined, and it was a group program. So we sort of all learned about what our health issues were, and she gave us advice on how to eat. And there was also a hypnosis component to sort of help you deal with emotional issues on eating. So it was very helpful program, I have to say, and something I go back to periodically.
That's a fantastic combination. You don't often get the therapy side thrown in as well, but it's very much needed, isn't it?
It was great because there was a lot of things about food triggers and the emotional things that food and emotions are so intricately bound together that it was a really helpful thing to start to see, oh yes, I'm bored, and so therefore I'm eating.
Absolutely. And did you influence Chris diet-wise, or did you come to keto from a different
No,
we actually lost weight around the same time frame, but we didn't know each other really that well.
Right.
I believe, right, Jill? I mean,
right. I would say, yeah, I wasn't even sure that I ever knew until Chris told me that she had lost a lot of weight.
yeah, we didn't know each other at that point. I knew of Jill, because we both were women business owners.
In the same community.
The way I lost weight was by joining Weight Watchers. And, I decided that I put it on very slowly, so I'm not going to go crazy and try to take it off really fast. I'm going to really try to learn the program. And what helped me, I think, in Weight Watchers more than anything was paying attention to the proportions of my food, or portion control, and really learning a little bit more about nutrition and things like that. Although I will say it's not a perfect program. They try to sell you a lot of things like chips, which are my downfall. So I didn't purchase the Weight Watcher products per se, because there's a lot of prepared foods there. I really tried to focus more on whole foods and learning the fiber content. I never had considered fiber content of foods when I was dieting at any point. And so I learned a little bit more through Weight Watchers, but it wasn't until I had already achieved my goal and was trying to keep it off and started doing more exercise. That's about the time that Jill and I got to know each other.
Right.
And it was through running, it was through the exercise that Jill and I became close buddies.
And what we sort of figured out was, after you lose weight, there's not nearly as much support for us out there on how to keep that off, because there's lots of ways to lose weight, or lots of people who can they're more than willing to tell you how to do that. But
for a price, usually.
You don't hear a lot afterwards about, okay, you're at whatever weight you're at, and this is what you need to do to maintain it. I remember going to the library and digging out some books and reading what people said at the time. And it's just been one of those things of constantly trying something, because it's, I think if I left on my own devices, I would just gain all the weight back and
for sure
go on my
That's how I feel.
way. And
right.
Yeah. So it is something that I think about.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a hard part that I think a lot of people underestimate. There are many people who maintenance is what they've always done. They've never had a problem with weight. I mean, my father, I think, has been the same weight since he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
Never really has slight fluctuation here and there, but never really had a problem. So maintenance for him is just normal.
Right.
Right.
But I think anyone who's struggled with weight gain and has either, I don't know about you two, but I was always in one state or the other. I was always either gaining weight and feeling good about it. Sorry. I was either losing weight and feeling good about it.
I probably was feeling good about it in some ways.
Or gaining weight and feeling bad about it. Rarely was I in that maintenance phase, but that's kind of the bit we're all aiming for, really. Right. But I think a lot of people, they're so focused on the weight loss goal that they haven't thought so much about what to do beyond that point. Yeah. And they're not used to being in that, just maintaining a steady weight phase.
Right. And I think we get so caught up in that we are in diet, in losing weight, that you never really think about what you're going to do when you actually hit a good rate that you want to maintain. If you haven't thought about it as that this is the way I live, then you just quit what you're doing and start eating the way you did before, and then you gain it all back because that's how you got there in the first place.
So it sounds to me like you two have found that fitness is a really strong component of that.
I don't know that it was so important for losing weight, but I
more
think
for the maintaining.
For maintaining it has been very helpful. Building some muscle and having some endurance. And, well, one, if you lose weight, I feel better moving than I did before. So it is easier to do those things. And I also found out I actually enjoy it. I never would have thought I had any kind of competitive feeling about working out, but I found out I do.
Yes, Jill is very
Even if it's competitive with myself. I would never have said that in my earlier days.
No, you're definitely a competitor, Jill, and you really epitomize, competing with yourself, which I think is one of the keys of sustaining a weight loss, is keeping track of things and kind of noticing how, for instance, Jill and I are both Fitbit buddies, and she will do a workout challenge, for the weekends and one for the weekdays, just to kind of compare steps. And even though I think it's better not to compare yourself to other people and more to compare to yourself, it still gives you that motivation and that encouragement and a little bit of accountability that you're doing something to move. And that's important. You mentioned, Daisy, that exercise is a key component to sustaining. At least it is for me. I think part of that is the endorphins. And part of it is, if I've done a really great workout, I don't want to mess it up by binging on some food that I, really, eating too much. I don't feel like eating that much after I've worked out. So it's kind of a neat thing.
So it impacts you in a number of ways.
Right. It helps with your mental approach, the endorphins or dopamine or whatever those different hormones, serotonin. I don't know. They all match together depending on if you're doing cardio or, what kind of workout that you're doing. I love that feeling.
You mentioned that you do different forms of exercise, and you find that there are different benefits to each. And, what would you say are the benefits to doing different things like the cardio and the intensity? And is there a balance that you found that works particularly well for you?
Well, I think I love the cardio the most, but I also know that I have challenges with my tendons and ligaments. So to just do that and not build strength, not do the stretching, the yoga, and some of the things that I need to do to take care of my joints, it can be a problem. And it also keeps me from overdoing it, because just like with dieting and trying to lose 10 pounds in a week, you don't want to do too much exercise too fast. Jill and I trained for half marathons together, and you really have to follow a program that, you do a little bit more each time, and then you back a little bit, and then you do a little more each time. But you have rest days where, there's a program to it, not just run and then stop,
Yes, I think doing both is helpful. It keeps everything, so that sort of cross training keeps you healthy. But I really like the strength training. And one of the things I figured out after a while, after I'd been for example, one time I was living alone. I had to change the screens and windows in my porch, and I was sort of thinking, maybe I should go get that guy who's working on the front porch for me. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm strong. I can do this. And I just put my thought to it, and I lifted that window out of the thing and took care of it. That feeling of being self-sufficient is something that I attribute to feeling able to take care of myself, because I have developed the muscles to, I can lift my suitcase when I'm traveling. I don't need help from people to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I must admit, I've always taken that for granted. I've lived on my own all my life, basically. So, yeah, if I want something done, I've always had to do it myself. And so I forget that, yes, some people don't take that for granted. So I guess I've always been reasonably strong. Although I think I lost a lot of my strength, actually, when I lost weight.
Right, you would.
With hindsight, what I should have done, what I should have been doing, isn't the benefit of hindsight great?
No, it's
What
wonderful.
I should have been doing is building my strength with exercise as I was losing weight. Because, of course, when I was twice the weight I am now, I was not only doing the physical, because I insisted on carrying on doing the physical things, even though I used to sit down and cry at night from all the welts and sores from my skin rubbing and getting hot and what have you. I had to carry on doing it. So I just kind of carried on regardless. But of course, that made me strong because I was carrying another person around with me all the time as well. But yes, like I say, stupidly, I didn't up the ante as I was losing weight. So I'm actually not as strong as I used to be. So I need to do something about that.
Well, the other thing, so I was talking with a man who had lost a lot of weight, and he said basically he's lost a lot of muscle, but you maintain your strength in proportion to what you are now. So, like he's worrying about benching more than his weight or whatever. So if you weigh 180 pounds, then you want to be lifting, 200 pounds or whatever. But if you weigh 280 pounds, then you've got to go up to 300 pounds. So you are going to have more muscle. It's just, you also have, it's like when I was trying to do a pull up and someone said to me, well, the less you weigh, the easier that will be.
Very true.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of does make sense, doesn't it? You don't realize that when you're heavy, though. You don't realize how many pounds you're actually carrying around. And it does build muscle, but it's all hidden. And I found that it was hard to lose weight and gain muscle at the same time. So I don't think you should be so hard on yourself, Daisy. But now that you're at a weight where you feel good, you'd be amazed that when you build muscle, how strong you feel, because the proportion of the muscle to your body weight is much different.
And you mentioned that you were both similar in that you have quite sedentary jobs.
Right.
How did you get into exercise in the first place? Where did you start? Or is it something that, you've always been quite into?
I'll go first. I was into exercise when I was younger, in my 20s. But after I had kids and got real involved with the computer, I found myself getting a lot more sedentary. It was almost impossible for me to exercise and enjoy it at my heaviest because it just was way too much work. It felt horrible. I couldn't understand why people loved exercise. But when I was on the Weight Watchers plan, part of their plan was you had activity points so you could actually eat more if you exercised, and you could swap things out, so that I found myself doing more walks. And I had an opportunity to have a treadmill in my office, and I set up my computer screen in front of the treadmill, and I could edit videos and things like that and walk very slowly on my treadmill. And before you know it, I did 6 miles just doing work. So that helped me to build up some endurance for exercise. So it didn't happen all at once, just like losing weight took me a while. Building up my exercise took me a while too.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned before that exercise isn't really a huge factor in weight loss per se. It might sort of help indirectly. It's one of my bugbears, that whole point system, how you can switch out exercise because it just doesn't work like that, does it? It's not a linear calculation. But yeah, I like how you built it up slowly. And it sounds like then, walking, running, that sounds like it was your go-to for both of you.
I like bike riding too.
All right.
Because it doesn't strain my Achilles tendon as much. Mm-hmm. And I found that was really fun, especially when I got involved with a bicycle riding group. And we did some fundraisers, and so we would do training rides and things like that. And I guess that's the key for me for exercise. If it's fun, I'll do it, whether it's dancing or running or biking or what have you. It's got to be fun.
Absolutely. I recorded, it's not out yet, but an episode of Monday Mindset that I recorded with Terry was talking about a podcast I listened to interviewing Kelly McGonigal, and she talks a lot about exercise and movement and how exercise has been seen by so many for so long as some kind of form of punishment, some kind of penance you do for something else like overeating or whatever it is. And she really wants
cod
people
liver oil.
move away from that and find the joy of movement. So I think you're right. I think finding something that feels joyful is is really the key, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It can just be harder for some people than others to find that joyful movement.
Well, that's true. That's true. Not everything. I think you can find something.
Absolutely.
We interviewed a friend of Jill's who does tap dancing, and she just loves it. And it really has made her very fit and strong. So, you don't have to limit your blinders to a treadmill. A lot of people call them the dreadmill because it's not as fun. But when you do something with other people and, certainly music and dance is a fun way to move without feeling like, all right, I have to have, 30 minutes of high, moderate exercise right now. It takes it to a whole nother realm.
Yes. I mean, you think back to those days in your teens when you would dance away the whole night at the disco. That wasn't, you didn't think of that as exercise. It was just having fun, wasn't it?
Right.
And I can remember, I can remember weighing myself before and after a night at the disco. Sweat out quite a few pounds.
I'll bet you did. Yeah. I think it's just finding out what you like or what your goals are. So I remember doing treadmill runs or walks, and I would listen to audiobooks or watch certain videos or things that I only listened to or watched when I was on the treadmill. So it wasn't that I was enjoying the treadmill so much. It was that I wanted to listen to that book or watch that movie or whatever. And that was my treat. That was what I enjoyed. And it was just the rule that I had.
I can see how that works.
You can find ways to do things.
Yeah, but you create that positive experience, that positive reinforcement.
Right. Because no one says, hey, I think I'm going to go to the gym and spend 45 minutes on a treadmill, and that'll be a fun way to spend the evening. You just don't think that way. But I had my treat of, I'm going to listen to this book or I'm going to watch this video or whatever. And that was the pleasure. And
Jill, you've mentioned that you're keto. What does your keto look like, and how has it changed over the time that you've been doing it?
What I don't do a lot of is, so I also in somewhere in there quit eating gluten for a long time. And what I don't do is go out and try and find foods that mimic, like I don't find gluten-free bread because I'm just not eating bread. I tend to eat meat or seafood and vegetables. And that's pretty much, I do eat some nuts and seeds and I do eat some fruit. And that's probably the biggest thing is when I first started, I thought, and it was in, late summer and early fall. And I love apples. And we live in Ohio, which has wonderful apples. We are like prime apple area. And I remember thinking, there has to be something wrong with this way of eating if I can't eat an apple. And I went probably a year and I didn't eat an apple. And then the next year I thought, you know what? I can probably eat an apple. So I did. And so that kind of thing. To me, it's figuring out what works for me and what I like and how I feel. One of the things I've discovered is I really struggle with certain dairy products. They don't make me feel good. I have skin issues. And one of the things I'm sort of beginning to realize is, you know what? Even though it fits well in a lot of keto recipes and whatever, dairy's not cutting it for me. But again, I don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to find replacements for those things. I just ended up sort of taking them out. And I think the hardest thing is that I now drink my coffee black. I struggled with that for a long time. I did not have a hard time with giving up sugar in my coffee. When I went to that original program and the doctor said, try drinking your coffee without sugar in it for 3 days. And I guarantee that after 3 days, you won't notice it. And she was right. I got through the sugar without any problem, but that giving up the cream in the coffee was a real challenge, but I've gotten there. And other than that, I think I have periods where I travel or go on vacation and I sort of go off what I'm doing. And then inevitably I come back and I realize I don't feel very good. And I'm suddenly gained a bunch of weight it doesn't take long necessarily to get that off because I think a lot of it is, retaining fluids and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I just sort of have figured out how I like to eat, and that's pretty much what I try to stick to. And occasionally I deviate, and then I usually end up regretting that and coming back to what I do.
I think there's a lot to be said for some kind of seasonal variation as well. I was listening to a really interesting podcast by the Whole 30 guy, Dallas Hartvig. I think I've got his name right. And he was talking about seasonality, not only in the typical seasons of the year, but seasons in your life as well, and how that can influence. They were mainly talking about diet, but can influence all sorts of things and behaviors. And they were saying that it's very natural to crave different things at different times of year. And I saw someone posted the other day who just, loves the summer berries.
Yes.
And could they have these? Did it fit in keto? And I think when you keep it seasonal, there's a reason that you have some of these cravings at certain times of year. And if you keep it seasonal, it works perfectly well, doesn't it?
Yes.
We're designed to have cravings for different kind of foods at different times of the year. There's a reason for that. And the only problem is that's all got so skewed with things being available all year round.
Yes.
But, your ancestors would have had a very natural reason to crave those apples when they were there and to eat them and store a bit of fat for the winter. There are reasons for these things. And it was very interesting how they were saying, how potentially something like a vegan diet works really well in the spring and summer, but doesn't necessarily suit people so well in the winter. And how you shouldn't be afraid to maybe fluctuate a bit, the way you eat during the year, during different times of your life. I think you need to be open to that.
So we interviewed a nutritionist, a person at the very beginning of the COVID-19 when we were all being first sort of socially isolated. And I said, I'm having these cravings for things like potatoes and with lots of butter on it. And she said, I'm going to guess that what you're craving are the things that you ate as a child, because we're going through such stress right now that we're feeling the need for those nurturing foods. It made perfect sense to me. And yes, she was absolutely right that the idea of eating, I was eating a lot of cheese, and those were all the things that when I was a kid that we would have eaten as treats.
Right. Yeah.
So, and you're right. There's just different, when you're going through phases of life, you eat differently. And I think sometimes you just have to be very forgiving of yourself we can't always be perfect in our eating or in anything, fitness or whatever. You just have to be kind to yourself. And that's sort of what we struggle with sometimes.
And what about you, Chris? It sounds like, I don't know, are you keto? It sounds like maybe you're not.
No, I'm not keto. I would say, I try to watch my carbs for sure. And I definitely like to focus on whole foods. You mentioned that earlier, real foods. I call them real foods, but I guess whole foods is kind of a program. But real foods that, I love to have what I call my no panic potluck salad. I mean, the listeners of our podcast have heard that and seen that on our blog so many times. It's mostly a whole lot of vegetables that I cut up into a salad that has, oil and vinegar and lemon juice in it and salt and pepper and some spices. And I love having something like that for lunch. Sometimes I'll add tuna to it. And my go-to breakfast is having some eggs. In fact, we have chickens here at our property. So
fabulous.
A lot of times we have fresh eggs, which is really great.
Oh, I'm jealous. I used to have chickens until the fox ate them all.
Well, we had
eggs,
trouble
there's
with
no
predators.
comparison.
Yeah. It's amazing the difference between the eggs.
Totally
you can really
different.
tell even our egg supply has become processed. And so I guess that's, I would say what I really avoid are things like birthday cakes and high sweet foods like, ice cream. I try not to have ice cream because that's kind of my downfall, or something like potato chips, that so many of the processed foods, the companies that invented those foods they're very good marketers, and they have a development team that really has focused on how that food feels in your mouth, what taste buds it hits, and it becomes addictive. And so I really try to avoid, what I really hate is when somebody has made something, especially for me, or brought something to a party, especially for me, because it's a celebration. And of course we all eat at a celebration. So I try to deal with that separately. It's more of an emotional eating situation. And that, I think is something that I try to focus on more than, say, a keto plan. I'm not a keto eater, I would say, but maybe low carbs. Maybe that would be it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And yeah, you're right. Food developers have put a huge amount of money into, I call it the unholy trilogy of combining fat, sugar, and salt.
Oh, yeah.
Just the right balance that you can't resist it.
Right.
You can't resist it.
We're programmed inside our brains, and so that's something that I try to be very conscious of, because once you have, there was even a slogan, I bet you can't eat just one, about those potato chips.
Once you pop, you can't stop.
Yeah. So, I think that's more where my strategies lie.
And what kind of strategies do you put in place to deal with those kind of events you mentioned? Because that's a very common one, isn't it? How do I say no? You're not only having to say no to somebody else, but obviously you're having to say no to yourself as well, because a lot
of times, some things I'll do is, maybe later, I'm not quite ready for it yet, say something like that. And often it's with a bigger group, so they don't even notice, so it's more of a delay factor, and then I don't really ever get around to it. Or maybe I'll say, how about if I take that home because I want to share it with my family, if I'm out somewhere, and then maybe I don't share it, or I give it away, something like that. It just depends, but there's certain foods that I really find that I like to avoid even starting to eat, because, I know it's a problem for me, and it usually surrounds the emotional eating. So it gives me a feeling of more of control over my eating, so that I don't, overeat and just go wild on it. Mm. But I still eat a lot of foods that I really love, but I've sort of trained my taste buds to love vegetables as much as anything these days,
And they do change, your taste does change. Yeah, I notice, and so many people notice how when you cut out the sugar and you cut out a lot of foods that contain a lot of sugar, if you do ever have a taste of something, one of these things that you used to like, it's not going to take long to train your taste buds back again. That first mouthful, it's like, whoa, okay, that's a lot sweeter than I remember it being.
Right, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. You really notice that.
And you taste the natural sweetness in foods as well. And you realize how much sugar is added to all sorts of things that really don't need them. You taste them and you think they're so sweet.
Yeah, well, when you read the labels about the corn syrup, the high fructose corn syrup is in everything.
We're not overly plagued by that. That's very much a US thing. I don't think it's even, it's not even allowed over here. They'll put sugar in everything, but luckily we don't have the high fructose corn syrup. Thankfully.
Well, it's weird because you would taste something and you would say, no, there's no sugar in that. It doesn't taste like it's sweet. But then you look at the ingredients and it's like the second thing, so what's up with that? It's just better to eat regular food. Whole foods, real foods, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Because when it comes out of a jar, you can't, unless you're reading the label, you don't really know what you have.
Even some whole foods, I've been astounded by how much more sugar is in them than I realized. I used to love butternut squash and I would eat it and it had that nice sweetness to it, but I didn't find it overly sweet. And you don't see them all the time in the supermarkets here. And I saw one a year or two ago and thought, I'm going to get that and make some butternut squash soup. I used to love it. And I thought, but you know what I'll do as well? I'll test my blood sugar, because I took one taste of it and it really tasted like I'd put a load of sugar in it. So I tested my blood sugar before and at intervals afterwards, and it went through the roof. And there was nothing else in there, apart from the usual things you'd add to some soup, maybe a tiny bit of onion, maybe it might have just been butternut squash and some, butter, maybe a bit of cream. And it went absolutely through the roof. And I felt it. I could taste it, and I could feel the sugar coursing through my system. So it's amazing how that taste for sweet does change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that you have to wean yourself from that. And once you are off it, you notice it a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And have you found, Chris, I was thinking when you were talking about controlling the emotional side around food, have you found that your exercise has really played a big part in that?
Yeah, I'd have to say yes. And part of it is the people you hang out with are more focused on fitness. I guess it's like anything. Who you talk to, what you talk about, what you focus on becomes more and more of your focus and who you hang around with.
Tell us quickly a bit about your podcast, as we were talking about when you were interviewing me just now. We're fellow podcasters. What made you decide to start the podcast?
Well, we wanted to start a community for women over 50 who were interested in being fit, strong, healthy. And somewhere in that discussion, we decided that a podcast was the way to go. I think we were both listening to a good number of podcasts. And I don't know, was there any other reason, Chris, that we came up with the idea of doing a podcast?
Well, I think it was when we were on the relay team for the Akron Marathon, and you and I both were listening to something called the Marathon Training Academy. And it was a husband-wife team.
Oh, right.
And they just had a very conversational style, very easy to listen to and motivational. And that kind of was of interest to me to get started with a podcast, because it's a whole new medium and one that you can listen to in the car or when you're working out or, walking along, on the trails and things like that. So that it's a new way to reach people. Now, women over 50 are not certainly the highest group when you're looking at in terms of listening, but we're probably one of the more fastest growing groups.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I find it a very intimate medium. I like it. I like producing a podcast, but I like listening to them. I like having those voices in my ear.
Yes.
It feels like you really get to know people.
Yes.
Right.
I was walking through Rome a couple of years ago, and I knew they were actually in the air, but I listened to a Roman history podcast where the one man is in Australia and the other one is in the United States. And I was walking down the street and I recognized their voices, and I stopped and I said, "Are you the Life of Caesar people?"
Oh, wow.
And they said, yes. They were shocked because, even so you do podcasting, it's not like people recognize you. But it was, yes, that there is a very intimate feeling about podcasting. You feel like you know the people you're listening to, or that you've met them. I enjoy that.
And I like the multitasking element. It's like I've got into audiobooks as well, because it's so easy to be doing something else at the same time.
Yes.
I used to travel further for my gardening work. I only have fairly short distances now, but still those 10, 20 minutes here and there going out with the dogs, you can accumulate quite a few minutes when you add them up, when you're doing the washing up, whatever else you're doing. Audio's great, isn't it, for being able to just make the most of that, not dead time, but the boring things,
right?
Some of the boring things you have to do to be able to listen to something interesting at the same time.
Right. Yes, I agree.
where can people find you? Where can they come and listen to your podcast?
Our website is Becoming Elli. And we call it Becoming Elli because we're still evolving and becoming fit and strong. And Elli is the Norse goddess of aging who was challenged to a wrestling match with Thor, and she won. So, that's the kind of aging that Jill and I decided we wanted to do. So it's Becoming Elli, ELLI.com.
I'm glad you brought up that. I had a little note here, getting ready to bring it into the conversation, what was behind the name, because that's a great story. I like that.
But the podcast name is Fit Strong Women Over 50, but that really had to do with Apple Podcasts and keywords and such. Our Facebook page and website is Becoming Elli.
And do you have a community on Facebook, a Facebook group as well?
We do. There is a Becoming Elli Facebook group, and it's a private Facebook group, and we do a lot of it's like every other, I guess, Facebook group. It's a very supportive community.
Yeah, we motivate and inspire each other and talk about successes and things that are maybe not as much of a success as we would want, suggestions and things like that.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put all the links in the show notes so people can come and find you if they haven't had a pen and paper handy to write everything down.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. We've been talking for ages now, having done a double recording session. Perhaps you could leave us with a top tip. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first. As far as exercise goes, I think my top tip is to find something that you love to do, whether it's bike riding or dancing or going for walks with your dog. But if you find something you love to do, it's not a problem. It becomes very fun and something you love it.
Something you can actually look forward to.
Right.
And I think my top tip would be to remember that nothing is set in stone, that there's nothing wrong with trying something. And if it doesn't work or it's not working for you now, even though it used to, it's okay to change and try something else. And back to what I was saying about being kind to yourself, just be tolerant and give things a try. And if it doesn't work, go on to something else.
Fantastic. Great tips. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you both.
It's been fun talking with you.
Yes, thanks so much for having us.
Great pleasure. Thank you. To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/KetoWoman. Or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman Podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman Podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from Octavia E. Butler. First, forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit is persistence in practice. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.